Joe Silverstein.
AJ Vanger.
How are you doing?
I'm doing excellent. I'm excited to be here. How are you?
I'm doing well. Same here. I'm very excited to be here. Last time we saw each other was at the New York Young Republican Club. They had an event for the volunteers who went to Bucks County, who went canvassing on behalf of the Trump campaign.
That's right.
Went door knocking, saw a couple people yell at us.
Yeah, a couple of interesting people. Some love, some yelling.
Some love, yelling. So I had some people yelling at us to get off their property. We had one woman who really freaked out about the signs. And 1989 was the last time Bucks County was flipped.
Yeah, it was a big deal that we flipped it. I remember watching on television too the night of the election when we saw Bucks County was going red, and I posted on my Instagram story, "You're welcome, America." And I'm sure that was really popular with the law school students that were looking at it. But no, we did something really important. We canvassed over 100 doors each, and we were knocking and talking to people. And it was really a great experience, and I think it was consequential. And it was just a lot of fun for me personally to get involved in a presidential campaign on that level. That's the first time I had done something like that on that scale. And I think it was just like a great thing to be a part of, and very meaningful in terms of its impact on the election and, of course, on the election's impact on the country.
And that's where we met.
That's right.
That was the first time we met at Bucks County.
Absolutely. We met at Bucks County. Got to meet a lot of interesting people. I got to meet Vish Bora, who was he was one of the players behind exposing the Hunter Biden laptop. And now he's a staffer for, or he was a staffer for various people in Congress. And now he's doing something big. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but it's something big. I got to meet Paul Ingrassia, who's a fellow Cornell grad and who is actually working as the White House liaison to the Department of Justice. He's an attorney that Trump has frequently posted his articles. So you got to meet a lot of interesting people. We got to meet each other, and that's what led to this podcast. And you're a quality guy and a smart person. I could tell you put a lot of effort and professionalism into this, and that's one of the reasons I agreed to do it. I'm very happy and honored to be your first guest on the show.
And you got me to join the New York Young Republican Club, which is absolutely amazing.
And I got you to join the Young Republican Club, so it's not so bad.
Love that.
So what do you think? We did all this work. We helped get Trump elected. I also volunteered at MSG. It just felt like a very important thing to be a part of. It's interesting. When I practiced jiu-jitsu, as my friends sort of like make fun of me for saying too much, but I practiced jiu-jitsu, and my head coach that runs that gym, before my fight, he just said good luck. When I did a jiu-jitsu fight over the summer in Harlem, raised a lot of money for charity. When we did that fight, he just said good luck. There was no stay safe. There was no be healthy. Obviously, I assume that was the sentiment, but there wasn't that like same concern of like, be safe. But so he didn't say be safe before the jiu-jitsu fight, but he did say be safe before I volunteered at the Trump rally and before I went knocking at Bucks County. And I think that reflects sort of like the political climate that we were in, and to some extent are in, but hopefully is starting to improve now. Is just like it shows how tense that election was and how volatile that election was, that people viewed what we were doing as somewhat of a safety concern and in danger for ourselves, for the volunteers.
I mean, if it went the other way, this country would be completely socialized. It would be a very, very bad state that we would be in.
I think so. And I think you could just look at the direction it was going and the difference between management of the border and deportations and deporting people that shouldn't be in this country illegally, that are here illegally. And we're not talking about people that are just here and living here and trying to build a life. We're talking about there's people here that are convicted of crimes, violent crimes, felonies, that local governments, like in New York, for example, the NYPD is prohibited from working with ICE and giving information to ICE. And that's because of laws that the city council has passed. So there's instances where there's somebody who is convicted of murder, of rape, of various other heinous crimes, and the NYPD is prevented from giving this information to ICE for purposes of deportation. And I think that just goes to show you sort of the extreme of where that leftist ideology leads. And that's not to say that everyone who's liberal agrees with that extreme of a policy, but it does show where when people with certain ideas get the reins of power, where they want to take the country, or in this case, the city.
And you see that with now Pam Bondi. She's taken away the money, the federal money, to New York State, New York City, as a sanctuary city. She's cutting all that funding out.
Yeah.
So hopefully that will get New York back onto its path of like the Giuliani days.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's important too, right? Because we have this system of federalism, and at the end of the day, the federal government has to be willing, within constitutional bounds, to threaten funds to cities and states that don't want to comply with the deportation effort. This is something everybody has a heart, and I have a heart, and Trump hasn't said what he's going to do with the Dreamers, and there's people here that I understand have been here for 15, 20 years working and haven't committed crimes. So it's not to demonize people, but it's just to say that at the end of the day, we have a country with immigration laws and a border, and that has to mean something, and with that being said, we as the public have to realize that you can't just let everyone stay. You can't open up like it got crazy to the point where you couldn't walk down the streets of Manhattan without like illegal vendors like selling things, and it was very chaotic. And I think that now things are starting to improve. And even John, our friend John, that was in Bucks County with us, who happens to be a police officer, John mentioned that the streets are just like much more clean. Like you're not dealing with the same problems of like migrants, like rolling out sleeping bags on the sidewalk. It's just a very different place. And I think the sentiment of the country has changed a lot.
I remember taking the ferry across from Staten Island to the city, and it looked like a farmer's market. There was people selling fruits and vegetables, and these are all illegal vendors that don't have any licensing or anything like that, just selling. And I'm all for that. But I think I'm all for following the law. And,
right.
Are you paying taxes? Because my check, they take a lot of taxes
on
my check.
Yeah, no,
and I'm funding those people to stay here to, get X amount of money per month, live in a free hotel, free healthcare, all these things that I would love to have access to that.
Yeah. And you're totally right. Like in states like California, for example, like California itself even passed a law giving free healthcare to illegal aliens. And I think free gender reassignment surgery, I reject the premise of that surgery.
Let's just get this clear on the podcast. There's two genders.
Yes, no, that is true. There are two genders. But I think it's very important that we have the conversation of the country about like where are we putting our resources. And you mentioned the hotels, the idea that for years there have been homeless veterans in the country, and just like homeless people generally, and there's nowhere to put them. And as someone who rides on the subways, it's like the subways have sort of gotten like progressively worse and worse, right? Like it used to be that there would be someone who is an emotionally disturbed person who's on one end of one car, and you could go to the other end of the car or to the next car on the train and sort of like just avoid that person. And it was an inconvenience, and it was something that some people found alarming, but it just was what it was. But now it's like you go and walk away from that person to the other side of the car, and there's another homeless person on the other side of the car. And it's like the homeless crisis has really gotten out of control in the country. And some of that, a lot of that is domestic citizens, but also it doesn't help the housing market and the housing supply that we had all of these illegal immigrants coming here in violation of the laws in the country. And when we're putting illegal immigrants who just arrived in luxury hotels, when they're staying at the Four Seasons or some other hotel that's been closed,
Hotel.
Yeah, that's been closed down during the pandemic, it's just really an insult to the people that work really hard to pay rent and to budget and to save money. And it's just something that's not sustainable for a country that hopes to thrive and be prosperous. You look, it cut into the library funding. The New York Public Library and the Brooklyn Public Library were two libraries that had to cut their days as a result of the city's budget cutting, which Mayor Adams has said was in large part driven by the migrant crisis and the need to accommodate that. You look at extra homeless shelters that are being built in neighborhoods. I know there was a big controversy over here a couple of years ago in Staten Island because they had put a migrant shelter. And it's just something that really has been very much a burden and an inconvenience on the domestic population. And it's something that the country didn't sign up for. Like there's laws on the books in the country to prohibit illegal immigration. And when our politicians refuse to enforce those laws, the country did not consent to an influx of tens of millions of people. And the idea that we now have to allow them to stay, despite the fact that they broke our laws and despite the fact that our politicians didn't enforce our laws, it's really an affront to the sovereignty of the country, but it's also an affront to sort of like democratic aspect of the country to just say tough luck, they're going to stay. So I think the Trump administration is taking, in many cases, appropriate steps to alleviate that issue. And it would be very different, to your point, if Kamala had won.
Which I think it hurts the person who's here trying to make the living and a legal living, even though if you're here illegally, the people, the guy who's lighting the person on fire on the train,
right?
These people who they might have came here illegally but don't break the law or anything. Scratch that, they broke the law for coming in.
Yeah, no, but that's an important point that you're making, right? Like they did break the law by coming in, and it's something that Tom Holland said, or Tom Holland said to the press, and it's something that Trump's press secretary said to the press when she said, what laws did they break? And she said, well, we have immigration laws. And I was watching Tom Holland on ABC, and he was saying in the interview, like, these are like court ordered deportations. Like, these are people going before the court and being ordered to leave, and they have to leave. And if we're going to ignore the court orders and that judicial process, why do we have immigration courts at all? And why if we followed the ideology that the left wants and the people that have allowed this to happen and willfully encourage this to happen want, why do we have immigration policy at all? It's like it defeats the purpose of having borders. So I think that we have to enforce the policy. I think that they're right to target the people who have committed crimes, the people who are deviants in society, people who we don't want here, people who are lighting people on fire. There was a homeless woman that was raped under the boardwalk in Coney Island this past election cycle. Before the election, it was in the fall, and she was raped by a group of illegal immigrants at knife point under the boardwalk in Coney Island. So it's like, it's easy for people who aren't in the subways, aren't in Coney Island, aren't in the various places to sort of have a moral signaling about this issue. But what about all the people that died from fentanyl overdoses because of what's coming across the border? So if the morality of people getting deported is on us, is on people who voted for Trump, and we're supposed to, and I think there is a human aspect to this that is important and shouldn't be disregarded in policy or in rhetoric. But that being said, if we're going to be considered bad people because we voted for Trump and support some form of deportations, at the least for criminals, but more broadly, people who have come here recently have to go. We just don't have the capacity to deal with this. Right. But if we're the bad people for that, then do we then put the moral onus on the people who support open border policies, on the fentanyl overdoses, on the human trafficking that's happening at the border, on the apartment building in Colorado that got taken over, that members of the media said, oh, it was only one apartment or two apartments? In what world in America are we trying to minimize how crazy it is that illegal immigrant gangs are running apartment buildings and taking them over in the United States?
Which they just went, I believe it was yesterday or the day before, that they had there was a leak that they had told the migrants that they were coming, and they ran away. They left the apartment building.
Oh, that's interesting.
They were only able to round up like 2 or 3. Don't quote me, but a small number. They were supposed to get 100 people, and I think they only got like 2 or 3 or 5 or something like that.
Yeah, and I think they got one of the guys from Colorado. They actually found him in the Bronx and deported him.
Right.
One of the perpetrators.
Because you get the free flight. You go anywhere you want.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's you get the hotel, you get everything. That's how stupid the country is. But so it is interesting, but it's one of the many areas of policy that I think will be better because we have a Trump administration. And I think there's conversations to be had about what types of deportations do we want to do? Who do we want to prioritize? Are there some people that have been here a really long time that do we want them to stay in some form without citizenship, but in some form? But that being said, though, I think at the same time, the way things were going was just totally unacceptable, and it's very good that it's changed. So I think there's a lot of progress on that issue. And there's progress on other issues more generally. Like one of the things we were talking about on the way here was Doge and everything Elon Musk is doing with Doge. And I'm just curious what you think about that and what you think about some of the promise of that could be and what potential areas of conflict could they run into.
I love it. The biggest thing, I think, the Department of Education is what they're teaching everybody is if you're a white male or this, you're racist. And I think that it's absolutely insane what goes on, the rhetoric in this country. If you're a conservative person, you are labeled a racist. It's what they teach. Even people in college, you graduate college, you have multiple degrees, you're 90%, 95% of people, you're a liberal. If you're an educated person, the majority of educated people, I would assume, are liberal.
Although it's starting to shift a little bit with this past election, but I take your point, though. I definitely think that there's a bias that's very strong in the education system, and there is something about the education system that almost, especially in undergrad, and multiple people have said this, and it's been written about by, there's a student at U Chicago. He's probably still a student at U Chicago. This was a few years ago, and he relaunched the conservative publication at U Chicago and was on the Tucker Carlson show at one point. And it was at a similar time to when I relaunched the Cornell Review at Cornell. But he had a Twitter thread that went viral, and he was talking about the ways that his college education sort of made him feel guilty for being white, for being from a middle-class family. And I do think that there is some aspect of that in the very left-wing and identity politics-driven college education that people experience. And I think it leads to some pretty crazy outcomes in terms of like what's acceptable to say in the public dialogue and what's not acceptable to say in the public dialogue. Like a more recent example is at my law school, there's a affinity group room. And in the affinity group room, there's a poster that says like, no Zionists on campus, no Zionist donors, like keep your Zionist hands off of our campus. And I just think to myself, like, about any other group of people, like that type of thing would not be like socially acceptable to put up in an affinity group room in a school. But because it's targeting Jewish people, right? And because it's targeting a minority that we don't often think about as a minority, it's sort of like tolerated in a way that it otherwise wouldn't be. And I just think like a lot of that like intersectionalism and a lot of that identity politics driven thinking, there's a lot of flaws in it. And I think people realize it. And I think that's one of the reasons for Trump's resounding win.
And what do you feel about like the Netanyahu just came to the White House, spoke to Trump, the whole Gaza situation?
Yeah.
What's your outlook on that?
Yeah. It's interesting. Trump definitely has a better relationship with Netanyahu than Biden did, even though that relationship at times was flawed. But that being said, with regard to the Israel-Gaza conflict, I just want everybody to stop dying, sort of similar to what Trump said. I think that what he said about Ukraine, I think that there's a need to take out, and much of it has been taken out, the leadership of Hamas. And I think that Israel has a right to defend itself. And I believe that strongly. But I also believe that at a certain point, we have to say how much human life lost is too much, and what is the end goal here? Like what is the Israeli government trying to accomplish? And I think that I'm not an expert on the conflict to really give you a very clear opinion about what the policy should be. You're dealing with a very tough enemy in Hamas from the standpoint of they launch rockets into Israel and then they embed themselves in civilian populations, and they embed themselves under schools and under hospitals and under other places. So it becomes very difficult from a moral, even though morally it's clear what you have to do, but from a moral and publicity standpoint, it becomes difficult for the Israel side because you're attacked by this terrorist group Hamas, who's launching bombs from hospitals and schools and embedding themselves in these locations. You have to retaliate, and you have to have the right to retaliate. But when you do so, naturally, the media is going to report it as Israel bombs hospital, Israel bombs school. Right. So that is a strategy. It's documented. That is a strategy of Hamas, that they do this, that they do embed themselves in these sensitive civilian places. And this way, when Israel retaliates, they look very bad. So obviously the rule can't be that Israel can't defend itself, because then can every terrorist organization just embed itself in a hospital or a school and operate out of there? So it's a very tough situation, but I think that Trump's leadership in this area is good.
Yeah, I agree. Another question is, Russia and Ukraine. Well, I want to know your view.
Yeah, and I also just want to say one other thing on the Israel-Palestine conflict. When you look at Palestine and when you look at the citizens of Palestine being polled in public opinion polling, there's a lot of denial about the fact that October 7th occurred. There's a lot of justification of it. If you look at the surveys that have been done and the percentages of the opinion polls, there's a lot of justification of it, saying there was nothing wrong with it. So again, that doesn't justify, just to be clear, that doesn't justify indiscriminate civilian killing. That's wrong, and we should seek to stop death. But at the same time, that's an important part of the conversation that we have to have, is that the population here has been very indoctrinated to hate Israel and want to kill Jewish people. So that is a factor too, that's very relevant. And when the bodies were getting dragged into Palestine after the October 7th attack, they were met with cheering crowds. So that doesn't mean that the justification of like prolonged death with no clear military objective is acceptable, because it's not. But that is an important detail that we have to include here too, is just that there is this reality, and it's not good to, it's not necessarily the polite thing to do or the politically correct thing to do to point that out. But that is the thing, is we do have people, and there's the dog, and that's okay for such a for such a sensitive topic. This is actually nice relief. But we do have people that have a certain hatred toward Israel, and there is some moral culpability when you're talking about the bodies being dragged back into Palestine and people celebrating. And when you're talking about videos of people celebrating after 9/11, again, I'm saying this with the caveat that obviously this doesn't justify the indiscriminate killing of civilians. There still has to be respect for international law and human rights and all of these things which are important. But that's an important part of the conversation that everybody's afraid to say that needs to be said.
I agree.
But with regard to Russia and Ukraine, I think it's excellent that Trump is president. I think he's better equipped to deal with this than Biden. I think that U.S. actions have led to the situation that we're currently in over a period of decades. We promised Putin, we promised Russia, and this is just what it is. People could look at the facts and look. We don't have to sit here and agree with stupid decisions that our leaders have taken just for fear of being called not patriotic. If we don't, I would like to think of myself as very patriotic. I love this country. I think we need to put America first in all of our interactions abroad. But that being said, there have been some very stupid decisions made by some very stupid people. Not the least of which is George Bush, who sort of flirted with the idea of Ukraine coming into NATO. And then President Obama also flirted with the idea of Ukraine coming into NATO. There was a pro-Russian government that was in power in Ukraine in 2014. And John McCain and Lindsey Graham went there and instigated a coup against the pro-Russian government and installed a government that was more aligned with our interests. And that doesn't mean that we're justifying Putin's actions. Putin is a strategic adversary who's putting forward the best interests of Russia. Russia is a country that in some ways in many ways has acted against our interests, is unfortunately somewhat of an adversary and a competitor. But nonetheless, our policies, I think, have led to this moment of Putin deciding to do this. And I think that this probably could have been avoided with smarter U.S. policies over a period of decades. We had an agreement with Russia that Ukraine would never join NATO, and then subsequent presidents sort of fluctuated on that and flirted with the idea of bringing them into NATO. I think that was a part of this decision. And I think that with where we are now, the question is, how do we stop the war without more people dying and without the risk of nuclear war or like a wider war escalating?
I love when people say...
By the way, I'm doing, just really quick, I think I'm doing better than Kamala Harris would. I mean, look at this. You're getting a 25-year-old law school student. He's giving you more coherent answers than a presidential candidate. Not to mention Biden, who served for 4 years, who should have been in an institution, perhaps, instead of the Oval Office.
Biden is... he's dead. Poor guy.
Well, he's
dead
not.
inside.
He's actually he's not dead. He didn't. He
didn't pass on.
He didn't pass on, but he did sign on. He signed on to a talent agency.
I saw that.
And God bless him. I hope it works out. Hopefully, he does better with his acting career than he did as president.
Horrible 4 years.
Right? Wasn't that bad?
I love when people always say Putin, the dictator, but nobody speaks about Zelensky not being elected into the government. He's just running that country.
Oh, was he not? I thought he was elected.
No, he was not elected. It was a whole coup. He just put himself as the leader, and nobody said anything about it.
Okay, I do know. I am familiar with the allegations that there's certain Christian churches that have been prosecuted in Ukraine because they're viewed
Ukraine
as
is notorious to be an extremely corrupt country. Nobody speaks about that.
Yeah.
It's always, again, I don't think anybody is, I'm not choosing a side here. I'm just saying everything's Russia.
And it's been for years.
Nobody speaks about Ukraine.
Well, that's true. And I think that, and I know that you agree with this, but I just want to clarify because I don't want you to get heat for something that you're not saying. You're not blaming the people of Ukraine for that, but you are pointing out the legitimate fact that there are the government of Ukraine and the people that run it. There have been corruption issues, and this is something that's
forever.
And this is something that's been documented by nonprofits. This is something that's been documented on democracy indexes that various professors and whoever else get involved with making. So this is a legitimate concern that you're expressing. And it's interesting. The thing with Ukraine is we sort of are where we are. I know coming into this administration, after he was elected, but before he took office, there were rumors that Trump wanted to create some sort of a demilitarized buffer zone in between Russia and Ukraine, and he wanted to freeze the battle lines where they are now and have the European troops sort of facilitate that and be the ones that are guarding this demilitarized zone. I think that that's a good idea. I think that there's other things we could look at.
To be clear, in my opinion, we are basically at war with Russia. We're sending money to Ukraine. We're sending missiles to Ukraine. They're using our stuff. It's a corrupt country. It is known to be for a corrupt country, and we don't speak about that at all. Like I said, all we speak about is Russia.
Yeah, no, I think you have.
We all know Vladimir Putin is a dictator. We get it. But what is the definition of a dictator?
Somebody who I guess commands the country in a way that is not democratic.
Zelensky did not win an election. There's nothing democratic about it.
That's interesting. Yeah, that I actually didn't know specifically about Zelensky. I knew that there was sort of the coup that took place, and it was done in a way that was less than straightforward.
He just decided that he's going to be that guy.
Well, so here's what I would say. I would say two things. The first is that even with the corruption of Ukraine, and I think we've already both said this, but I just want to make clear because I know people will watch this and cut and try to, say things that I didn't say or that you didn't say. Even with the corruption of the Ukraine, we're not saying, or at least I'm not saying that justifies the invasion, and it doesn't. But at the same time, I think that the public dialogue around this issue should be more nuanced than it is. And I've been saying that from the beginning because I remember when it was Ukraine was on TV all the time. And I think the fundamental issue here is that we've put ourselves into a direct war with Russia. And Ukraine is now using long-range missiles provided by the United States to strike targets within Russia. So I don't think that that's good. And I think that's a very dangerous place. And I would just want people to imagine for a second if Russia or China equipped Mexico with long-range missiles to launch into the United States. Now, obviously, overall, we have a relationship with Mexico that, despite the problems at the border, which are significant and which need resolving quickly and which Trump has taken steps to do, and the president of Mexico has agreed to supply troops. But despite our problems with Mexico, obviously, it's a different scenario where we don't have the same dynamic with Mexico. But imagine it's hard to imagine, but imagine just for a second if Russia were supplying long-range missiles to Mexico and Mexico were launching those into the United States. That would be something that is looked at in a very disfavorable way, obviously, by us. And it would be looked at as an act of war on the part of Russia. And I think that's what we're doing here. And you have senior United States senators like Lindsey Graham, for example, who went on Sean Hannity and made a statement that one of the Russian soldiers should assassinate Putin. And I just think that's a very foolish thing for someone to say in that position. I think it's a very irresponsible thing for someone to say who's a United States senator. It's very inflammatory and it's not helpful. And I think that frankly, if we went to war with Russia, I don't think it's rifles we have to be worried about. But I don't think if it were rifles that Lindsey Graham would be the first person to pick up a rifle and go march into St. Petersburg, is my opinion. I think he'd be one of the last people, to be honest with you. So it is a problem, and I hope Trump could solve it. And I think he's better equipped to solve it than the last administration and whoever was running it, including Biden, but not limited to Biden.
Which, to be clear, they took land under Obama, Biden. Did they take any land under Bush?
I don't know. It's possible. There's been conflicts in there for a while.
And these are things you just don't hear. It just happens. It gets swept under the rug.
Right. And when Trump was in office the first time, of course, they didn't take land.
Of course not, because peace through strength.
Yeah.
They're too scared to do that.
Yeah, and that's what we saw with the hostage deal too, right? That's what we saw with the hostage deal with regard to Israel, Gaza. Trump got the hostages before his inauguration. It was very similar to like Reagan, Carter, except on a much bigger scale. And that was Trump, and that was Trump's threats, and that was Trump's bombasticness. But it was backed by a very legitimate thing, which is the might and power of the U.S. military. And there's a certain fear of Trump, I would say, or at least respect for him, depending on the situation, that there wasn't for President Biden.
I agree.
And I think that's a very good thing. I think it's also very good what he's doing with a lot of the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. What do you think about the DOGE stuff?
I love the DOGE thing. I love. I mean, some of the things they found USAID. They were finding transgender things in Iran. I think it was. They were at Sesame Street in Iran.
Okay.
Things that are just, if you went to Iran and you were, if you were gay, they would hang you from, or they'd throw you off the building.
Yeah, it's not a good place to be LGBT. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. It's kind of crazy. Like sometimes you see like LGBT for, for Palestine or for this, and it's just
which is all college kids.
A lot of it's
the
college
majority
kids.
Is college kids.
But again, I think that goes to some of the tainting that happens in the press of like, because these realities are politically incorrect to acknowledge, people don't want to talk about them. But the fact is that some of that support for some of those places would not be so well received in those places. And that's just like the reality, but people don't talk about it because it's just something that doesn't fit the mainstream media narrative. And it's not something they want to talk about. But yeah, the Department of Government Efficiency stuff generally, I think, is just very good. I was reading part of the lawsuit on the way here because one of the things that Trump did, which I think is genius, and I think if it legally could stand, I think would be very good. Let's see what the courts do and what his administration's legal response will be. But one of the things that he did is he sent a fork in the road email, and he offered like 40,000 federal employees the chance to resign, and they would get paid until September of this year. And then they would effectively resign. And it's because he's doing a thing similar to what the leader that took place in, it's a Latin American country, the one that's a very big Trump supporter. I forget his name off the top.
El Salvador.
No, not El Salvador. He's a big Trump supporter too. The other one, the libertarian that just won. The one that went on the whole rant about, they try to destroy the left. They try to destroy you. They try to, does anyone, Melfa, do you know? You don't know? We got to look back. We could put it maybe in the bio because it's something that I'm not remembering the name of the leader at the present moment. But anyway, he went in and he cut like so many of the agencies and he just abolished them. And that's something that Trump is sort of looking to replicate in some form. Now, it won't necessarily be abolishment, but it will be getting rid of a lot of people that work there. Like a lot of these jobs that people aren't going to the office. That's like, it will have to be a case-by-case basis. But I think putting someone like Elon Musk in control of that is also very good and a very wise decision on Trump's part.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm reading through Elon Musk's biography right now, and it talks all about his building of SpaceX and his building of Tesla. And there's just like so many things, like so many engineering things and like spur of the moment decisions that he makes that it would take a larger company like Boeing or Lockheed Martin months or years to take, and he does it in 5 minutes. A piece of the engine was chipped. He cut off a piece of the engine. Like just so many things that the way he runs his companies. And one of the things is like, he always tries to get down to like like what is the specifics of like the regulation of like why do we need this? What specific regulation says we need this? Why is that regulation in place? Who made that regulation? And then they would go back and forth with the agencies and sometimes get the regulations changed. So I think Elon Musk is the type of person that could really drill down on detail. He's an engineer. He's the world's most successful, or at least richest man. I guess success is sort of a more subjective term, but in terms of wealth, other than maybe guys in Saudi Arabia that we don't know who their, what their names are or who they are, but in terms of documented, he's the world's richest man.
And I think Trump wants Musk to go, and there's 2 astronauts, I believe, up in space.
Yeah,
who they're stuck at the International Space
Station. He wants them to go get them.
He's going to go get them.
It's really interesting. So this is an interesting topic to discuss too. And I actually submitted an article to a publication very recently about this, actually yesterday. And we'll see whether they publish it, whether they don't publish it. Last time I got published was November about Scott Bessent's nomination. But if they don't publish it, maybe somebody else will publish it. It's sort of the way life goes. But an article that I just wrote was about the colonization of space and the fact that the United States will need to soon and should soon develop space law, or should develop law to govern the colonization of space. When we talk about things like investment in Mars, we need to have a law that governs that in the same way that laws were passed to govern the country's westward expansion. When you look at commercial space flight, right, which will be sort of like so first to zone out, because this sounds like a very like bold idea, and this is something that's interesting, but we have to approach it right so that people understand and that people believe in it. So Donald Trump says we're going to send Americans to Mars and plant the American flag before the end of his second term. Elon Musk has plans to land 5 rockets on Mars in 2026. And if that's successful, wants to go ahead, of course, and make that reality that Trump is going for. Musk is someone who's revolutionized the space industry and revolutionized not just commercial space flight, but just space flight in general. NASA used to be the organization that would fund and launch the rockets. And they still fund them, but it's not NASA engineers building it anymore. It's been sort of like assigned off to these private companies. So you have Elon Musk, SpaceX, you have Richard Branson getting in on it. You have Jeff Bezos has Blue Origin, and you kind of have all these billionaires that are competing with each other to reach different milestones with these rockets and to bring commercial space flight into I was going to say the world, but it's not the world, I guess, sort of into existence, the universe, whatever you want to call it. So you have all these billionaires competing to do this. You have a president who's very eager to get this done and has a very visionary and bold, expansive view of the country. So I do think, and the first time we landed a rocket on Mars or landed spacecraft on Mars is 1976. So it's not like we haven't been to Mars. Like, we haven't put people on Mars, but like, we've made substantial progress in this area, and the progress stagnated. It's okay, a little congestion, we're all human. We made, and we can leave it in there, it's fine. But we made substantial, better than Rubio with the water, right? You remember Rubio? Yeah, and now he's doing good as Secretary of State.
I love Rubio.
No, I like Rubio. I think he's been doing very well.
And he deserved that. Position.
I think it was a good pick too, because I'm very big on RFK. I'm very big on Tulsi. I'm very big on some of these more revolutionary picks. Cash Patel. But I do think that you need to throw a little bit to the establishment and to the established order to just say like, hey, like, there's a variety of people. And I think that Rubio sort of served that purpose. Rubio is sort of like one of the safe picks. Now, that being said, I'm very big on RFK, and I'm very big on him going on and taking on the pharmaceutical companies and doing everything with that. And his book is one of the ones that maybe in an off semester when I'm not in the middle of the semester that I want to read. But anyway, with this space flight, I think that we're making a lot of progress in this area. And it's something that one of the next conversations we need to have is actual like investment in real estate and plots of land in Mars. And I'm under no illusion that the skyscraper is going to go up tomorrow. It may take 20 years. It may take 50 years. It may take shorter. It may take longer. But investment in Mars is the next obvious step, because when you look just at commercial spaceflight, right now it's a product for the rich. Jeff Bezos sold a ticket in his rocket that went up in 2021 for like $26 million. And it's something that's a product for the rich, but that's basically all technological advancements, and the rich fund them, and then it trickles down to the middle class. And this is not some like political theory. This is just the way it's always operated. When you look at electric cars like Tesla, the first Teslas were selling for $100,000 in like 2008. $100,000 in 2008 was worth a lot more than $100,000 today. And even by today's standards, $100,000 is a lot of money. Yeah. So it's like, when you look at the people that financed the growth of Tesla and were buying its original products, it was the wealthy. And when you look at it, it's the same for planes, it's the same for televisions, it's the same for most things. We're seeing that pattern. Commercial space exploration is just the next step of that, of the rich are going to be the first to do it. But if it's successful, eventually it'll start to be something that common people do. And it may not be now, and it may not be in the next 15. Although honestly, for space exploration, I think it probably will be on the sooner side. I don't think you're looking at 50 years away for people to start going into space and that being accessible in some form. But even in terms of what's the next step from that? So you have all these billionaires racing for commercial space exploration. What's the next step in that? The next step in that, to me, is investment in and building on Mars. Like, that's the point of planting the flag there. And one of the Elon Musk's life mission is to make humans a multi-planet species. And when you look at the risk of nuclear war, when you look at the fact that resources are limited, when you look at the fact that the sun's going to explode anyway in a few billion years, like, if we're going to survive as a species, and long before that, the planet will become uninhabitable. So and really long before that. So when you look at all of these risk factors and the possibility of asteroids, it makes sense that if humanity is going to survive in the longest term, and like life itself is going to survive in the longest term, and we're really going to make an effort. And I'm talking along a very long trajectory here. I'm not talking about like during either of our lifetimes, but we're going to have to be able to live on other planets and travel through space eventually. And why not do it now when we have the greatest technology we've ever had? We have a very ambitious president. We have a visionary in Musk who's already proven that he could do a lot of really incredible things. So I think that we should take substantial steps forward toward that future now. I think artificial intelligence is here. I think there's risks and challenges that it poses, but I also think since it's here anyway, we might as well use it to help with space exploration and various other things. And we already do. It's a big component of law. It's a big component of finance. It's a big component of engineering. So I think that the next thing that we have to do with regard to space exploration is start to create laws that govern the investment in property in space. And that doesn't mean we're going to build the skyscrapers tomorrow, but like, I do think we should talk about selling plots of land on Mars
before other country, well, China or someone else were to start doing something along those lines.
Right. And I think that the thing is, because people would say, oh, well, that's like, how is the government going to sell plots of land on Mars? The whole point of that would be, first of all, it's an early investment opportunity for people who are willing to do it. But second of all, that investment for people who believe in that product and that future would be what funds a lot of that development, because companies are going to have to form and research is going to have to be done. How does our understanding of physics and chemistry and other areas of science apply on a different planet? Like, there's a lot of things that will have to be discussed and thought about in that realm. And there's a lot of like research and money and like intelligent people that are going to have to go into that process. And I think that allowing people to invest would be a big part of that. And again, it's not that they're investing in a building that they think is going to go up tomorrow on Mars, but it's the idea when you look at the things people invest in anyway, look at like bullshit like real estate in the metaverse, crypto, which has no intrinsic value and is basically
Haktua coin.
Well, the Haktua coin, that Haktua is getting prosecuted now by the SEC and whoever else. Haktua really crashed out, unfortunately for her. Haktua was somebody who got fame and couldn't make it last.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
You know, but who knows? At the rate we're going, maybe Haktua will run for president. Look at Biden. Look at
she'd probably be a better president than Kamala
or Biden. I mean, Biden was in there. Biden was in there for 4 years. You know, with a lot of problems, to be honest with you. So I don't know. You know, it's really interesting. Like the fact that he had brain aneurysms before he was president, and the fact that he was deemed too mentally incompetent to be prosecuted for his classified document scandal. But then he's still able to be president. It's sort of incredible. And then the way he pardoned his family on the way out, he pardoned the brother, he pardoned everybody.
Fauci, all of them.
Like the hour, like on the eve, like the hour before Trump took office. But who knows? Maybe he'll sign to the same talent agency as Hak Tua.
Yeah,
it's possible. Maybe Biden and Hak Tua will start a podcast together. I think that'd be good. I'd watch it.
It might go number one.
I don't know what they're going to talk about, but I'm sure it'd be intelligent. Hak Tua, he's the Hak Tua president. But But that being said, though,
I want to ask you.
Yeah.
The final thing is
Sure.
The men and women sports ban that he just put into place.
Yeah. Well, I think it's good, right? I mean, I'm somebody who has competed in Taekwondo, has competed in Jiu-Jitsu, has sparred in boxing. I should not be fighting a woman, obviously. And I don't think that men should be fighting a woman. And the way that ESPN reported it in their tweet was people who were assigned, whatever gender at birth. And it's what is this, a subjective thing they were saying? No, there's differences between men and women. We were talking in the car about Serena Williams and how Serena Williams said when the reporter asked her, well, why don't they say you're the best tennis player of all time? Why do they always put the caveat female? And it's well, she said because it's a different game. The men are much faster, they hit harder, and she's happy to play in the women's game, and it's just a different game, and she would not do well. So I think that we have to be very honest with ourselves about the role of men and women in sports, and the fact that those two groups of people should not compete with each other. Ronda Rousey in her prime at 135 pounds is not going to knock out or submit Sean O'Malley.
Right. Yeah.
Chris Simon.
You can give Ronda Rousey 100 more pounds. I don't think it still would go Sean O'Malley's way.
Then she may have the cardio problem.
She would have a cardio problem, but it's just everything is different. The structure is different. Everything.
Yeah, no, it's very
everything.
true.
And there's nothing you cannot have. No, you can't. There's no question about that.
There is one thing I just wanted to finalize about the space thought before we jump off, which is just to finish the thought that when you look at the things that people spend money on, right? You look at crypto, NFTs. Crypto is something that's super expensive and takes a lot of resources to make, and costs $100,000 to buy one Bitcoin, and is just something that people still invest money in. But even the people that invest money in it really have a hard time telling you the intrinsic value. There's arguments about preventing government tyranny and stuff, but really cash could accomplish a lot of the same mission. And other countries like China have banned crypto. So if a government really wanted to ban crypto and really wanted to get rid of it, it probably could in most cases. So the idea that crypto is going to stop government tyranny, I hear you and I give some credence to that, but at the same time, I don't fully agree. But that being said, though, the point about the crypto and about the NFTs and about the metaverse is that people are buying all this fake shit. You know what I mean? NFTs were really big a few years ago, and now they're not. Crypto has no intrinsic value. So it's if real estate in the metaverse, which is now essentially a thing of the past because everyone went back to real life and no one thinks about the metaverse. But when you think about all of these things, these are things that people are spending money on. So why not let them invest in property on Mars? Why not let them buy plots of land on Mars? And the market value of that will factor in the risk of whether or not we get there and the potential opportunity. And there's all types of questions about what law would govern that. And there probably would be more demand than, although maybe not because it's an entire country, but presumably there would be more demand than supply in some form, because when we talk about colonizing Mars, we would be starting really with a small area in some form. But do we want it? How do we determine the value of that? How do we determine who gets to buy it? Do we want it to just be whoever has the money could buy as much land as they want? Do we want to limit it to a certain amount of land purchased per person? These are all legitimate questions that we should start thinking about. But I do think that facilitating the investment in space colonization is something that we should do, because my point of bringing up all these other things is to say that if we already have systems in place for people investing money in things that really yield no benefit, this would yield a benefit. This would be for the purpose of space colonization, for the purpose of the development of science, and the investment in this product would be to further those things. So I think that it's something that's a much more meaningful use of societal resources.
Yeah.
And if we're spending all this money on all these things, or letting people spend all this money on other things anyway that really serve no point, why not facilitate the investment of real estate and property and space? And I think it's a conversation that will probably become mainstream. Whether or not it becomes mainstream now, or if it comes mainstream in 10 or 15 years from now, I guess we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I agree. I want to ask you one last
Sure,
thing.
sure.
2028,
Mm-hmm.
on the Republican end, who's running for president?
I don't know. I think JD Vance will probably run for president. You never know if Don Jr. will jump in, but I don't think it would be in contrast with JD Vance. I think that they'd probably work it out amongst themselves in some form because they're friends. So, and it seems like they do have a close personal friendship. From the
Two
reports.
totally different personalities.
Two very different personalities, but I think it's really too early. Like, I like Vance a lot. I think Vance is great, and I think Vance has a lot of potential. And if you asked me who would I support in 2028, as of now, I guess it would be Vance. But I think it's too early to handy pick. Like, I think that we have to let them prove themselves to us and let it play out over a period of time, and let's see who people are and what their views are, and we'll make a determination at that time.
Sounds good.
So
thank you, Joe.
AJ, it's a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.